Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of the Tanzu Community Editions Office Hours. For those of you that are watching this from home as a recording on YouTube, we encourage you to come join us live for these office hours. We meet every second and fourth Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific time. It's a more open discussion format. So if you have anything you wish to bring up with the team that requires a little bit more time to go over, if you have a feature request, any help you may need with getting started with TCE, this is a great opportunity for you to come join us. And we'd love to help you with anything that you may have. If you aren't able to attend any of those office hours, we also have community meetings as another option for you to join. You can see here for those schedules, we meet every first and third Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific time for our more Americas friendly time. And starting later this evening, my time, we will begin our Apec monthly community meeting, which is going to be held every second Thursday of the month at 9 a.m. India Standard Time. So those are some great opportunities for you to join us live and get to know the team and other members of the community and bring any questions you have up with folks here. And if you aren't able to come and attend any of these options, you can still reach out to us. We're eager to help out. You can find us in the Kubernetes Slack workspace in the Tanzu Community Edition channel. You can find us in GitHub discussions. If you have a special request or suggestion, please add that to our issue list. And as always, send us an email. For those on this call and any one that's watching the recording and you have something you wish to bring up, you can add your discussion topic to the agenda that is down here at the bottom. So for folks on this call, if there's something that's come up that you wish to discuss while we're meeting today, please add that here and we'll get to it. And today's date is March 9th, 2022. If you're using TCE, we want to know more about how you're using that. So we've created this pinned issue here. Please go to that, add a comment with some details on your use case with TCE. Helps us and the community get to know how others are using it a little bit better to help us build better products and also help the community know other ways of using this. So it's a win-win and we'd love to hear from you. All attendees on this call, please put in your name and any company that you are representing. And like I said earlier, we have an announcement here. We are starting our APAC community meeting, which is happening at 9 a.m. Indian Standard Time, March 10th, which translates to 7:30 p.m. today, Pacific Time on March 9th. Moving on to status updates. Josh, you want to take it away for the engineering updates?
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Nancy. Hey, everybody. So we are working on our next release, which is V011. It currently targets a March release timeframe. I put some key items in here that the engineering team has completed and some things that are at risk. For those who might not be aware, one of the primary focuses is TCE working with this thing called TMC, which stands for Tanzu Mission Control. So for folks who want to hook and register TCE into something that can lifecycle manage from a SaaS perspective and basically create clusters, delete clusters, do package installs, things like that. That'll be something that will be possible. Tanzu Mission Control is a VMware product, just to be clear, but we will have compatibility in that going into V011. And then the implications of all this work we're currently doing is a couple things that I think a lot of people have been asking for a very long time. So in this release, some things to know is that upgrades of clusters will work again. There was a bug in upgrading clusters. cgroups v2 will no longer be an issue. So you'll actually be able to bootstrap without a lot of chaos and workarounds. We will finally be on CAPI v1 beta 1. And the CAP controller version will bump to 0.30 from what's currently 0.25. So those are some of the big implications I think end users are going to see. So in summary, we're targeting a March release. The things that you see in red up there are around the bill of materials being produced. So from a community perspective, y'all actually don't see the bill of materials process. It's today, at least, a lot of like downstream VMware things that we do to like build all the things like the machine images, the packages, and then eventually bubble it up into this bill of materials, right? So that's all being worked on. That's a bit at risk. So I would say there's a chance this release, if we don't get this bill of materials by tomorrow, could get pushed into April. We got to talk to product management to figure out what the right time framing would be. But again, if all goes well, we'd hopefully be on track for V011, and that's kind of a summary of some of the key things that will be in it. And with that, that's kind of all the TMC and updates to TCE. There's a lot going on with Tanzu application platform. So maybe I could turn it over to Kartik. Kartik, if you want to give some updates.
Wait, Josh, you forgot my favorite update that was merged.
Let's hear it.
John did, our meme-tastic TikToker. We merged Calico as the default networking for now for unmanaged clusters, which means with 11, when you shut down your unmanaged cluster and you bring it back up, you'll be able to connect to it again. Yay.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of unmanaged cluster enhancements that are coming in this release. So you all are seeing on this list, I guess, 4, 5, 6 things that we're working on. There's closer to 50 or 70 behind the scenes. So you can get a full list by going to the V011 milestone or project, and you'll see all the things that we're changing for unmanaged and all that good stuff too. Kartik?
Yeah, sorry, just on that topic, what Steve said, I think, and would love to, I'm happy to work with you and anyone else to highlight like 4 or 5 key unmanaged cluster features, like the one you just mentioned about Calico being the default CNI. That's amazing. And like supporting restart of clusters. So, oh, sorry, keeping them going after restarts. So that's fantastic. All right, on the Tap OSS side, there's been some great updates, literally even from the time I wrote this and from the time I'm giving the update. So as you can see here, Cartographer will be available as a package in TCE in the V11 release. Flux series source controller is actually merged. I should update that. And will also be available as a package in TCE. The TCE team, thankfully, thanks to them, gave us a new package repository with those new packages in. So if y'all want to give it a try, would love to see any early feedback you have. What is in progress and right now is the concept of the meta package that we have mentioned here before. The concept of meta package is it just installs a collection of packages, but the user experience of installing packages remains absolutely the same. So in a sense, it's yet another package with the implementation detail around installing a group of packages. I should probably stop using the word meta package until it's actually a first class feature in Carvel. The last one, which is in development, is the Tanzu App Cli Plugin. That one's on the yellow side. I should have done a better job of indicating the status of that, but that one is on the yellow side just because there's some binary signing work that needs to happen for it to make it in time for the TCE V11 release. But yeah, those are all the things. I want to mention one quick thing about the Tap OSS meta package. The user outcome that we are really focused in on is enhancing or enabling a developer with the local development and iteration experience. This is the start of that journey, and the intent is to make that and make it as easy as possible for a user to start with source code and then get to a running app. Yeah, so those are all the things. I see a question from Scott, which I think is good. Tecton is something that's on the roadmap. It's not something that we have in the package or we have available today not something we have planned yet for the upcoming release, but it's definitely on the horizon to get into TC as well. More questions. Oh, yes, Roger. Yes, that's a good question. So the Apps CLI plugin, let me back up. Cartographer introduces the concept of a workload, which is sort of the abstraction or the interface that application developers can interact with, or any users can interact with when they want to create, deploy, or delete their workloads. Tanzu App Cli plugin makes it easier for anyone to interact with the workload object using the CLI plugin. So you could do things like Tanzu Apps workload create, or you could do a get to get the URL of the workload, or you could do tailing of that to get the logs and so forth. So that's the purpose. There's additional sort of capabilities in that plugin, things like binding to your service. That's also something that is on the horizon to bring into TCE.
Great. Thank you, Kartik and Josh. Are there any questions that folks have that we didn't get to that have come up that you want to ask? Okay, and I also saw that Josh mentioned we'll post a list in Slack of all the planned and completed unmanaged cluster updates for V0.11. So thanks, Josh. Moving on to discussion topics. Kartik, I believe this is you, installing Tanzu CLI versus TC.
Kay and I were having a conversation this morning, well, morning for me, afternoon for her, but about like just the docs and the way we've, in a lot of places, we talk about installing TCE, and in some places we talk about installing the Tanzu CLI. In my mind and my opinion is that we should, and this sometimes bleeds into a larger topic, but I'll try to keep it focused on the specific question I have or discussion I want to bring up is, I think of TCE as a collection of various capabilities. And I don't really think of installing TCE. I think of like installing Tanzu CLI to get started. Just wanted to get folks here and their thoughts of being more, being consistent of whatever we mean in our docs, and then, well, aligning on what we are consistent about, and then making it consistent in our docs.
Yes, please, 100%. What Kartik just said, it is my biggest pet peeve. I install the Tanzu CLI. I do not install. Then I run the Tanzu CLI to put the TCE components on wherever I want to put them. But I'm installing. I haven't installed anything other than the Tanzu CLI in the install process. It's a pet peeve.
Yeah,
I'm coming around to your way of.
Real quick, Kay, before we get into docs, I just want to make one quick technical clarification here. It's a bummer. It's a tech debt that we're currently surfacing right now. The problem with the install flow today is that there are linker flags used, which is a build time concept that tell the CLI and accompanying binaries at times whether it's running in a TCE mode or a different version mode. So you are actually installing a Tanzu CLI that is compiled for usage inside of TCE. We do absolutely want to get away from this and move just to a model where it's about installing Tanzu, and is based on configuration instead, which are changes that folks like Shimon have put in. So I'll turn it over to you, Shimon. I'm guessing you're going to add on to that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we did do some work that should be coming out with this on release of the Tanzu framework that does take the sort of addition information out of the binary and puts it into a configuration file. So the same binary that you use for the TKG product and the binary that you install when you download and say, I'm doing a TCE thing, that binary should be the same, but the installation process should set that configuration file to indicate sort of what context you're running that binary in, and therefore some tweaks to how it behaves and what kind of messages it puts up and things like that.
Quick question on that. Is there any aspect of this that would be mutually exclusive? So using the Tanzu CLI on the commercial product versus TCE, can I do that interchangeably, or is the sort of the config file focused on you have to be one or the other?
You have to be. Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
Go ahead, Sean. We probably were going to say the same thing, but I just want to say that there are changes in framework v0.17 and above that enable the CLI to be used in the context in between TKG and TCE. We are pinned right now to v0.11. And today, Jace, you do need to completely replace the binary in order to use them in between the two modes.
And don't you need a different I don't know for sure, but is the TAP Tanzu CLI the same for TKG or TCE, or is it its own special Tanzu? Because we have 3 different places where in the instructions where I'm told to install Tanzu, and I don't understand if there's compatibility issues between all 3. So I don't know if that's still an issue as well.
Yeah, and you're asking about the app plugin, Steve, is that right? Tanzu.
No,
app
if I
plugin?
actually go to the TAP instructions right now, it says download the Tanzu CLI. And I don't know which one it's actually telling me to download, what's it compatible with. Like, it doesn't say this is the TK. It doesn't say which version it just says go get the Tanzu CLI and then update your repository and do the following things. And so that's what I'm saying. We use Tanzu CLI in 3 different places, and it's not right now. I don't think it's
That's really painful. Yeah. Kartik,
Yes.
do you know offhand? I'm guessing we're telling them to download the TKG based Tanzu CLI.
Correct. So right now, if you download the TKG based Tanzu CLI, it will work with your TAP product as well.
Okay.
But you would need to add the additional plugins as Scott is indicating in the chat.
That's a whole nother TAP issue that we will discuss on TAP. But I would like to actually, though, also hear what Kay had to say about the.
Yeah, I was just pretty much concurring with what you said. Yeah, I think it was I kind of forced that install TCE into the docs. Yeah, and I've kind of reframed my thinking. I was actually working on the PR to get that changed. So you'll see that going into the docs very soon.
But I don't think this is a simple issue. It was confusing, right? Like, what was it that we're actually doing?
Yeah, well, it was confusing. It was confusing for me, yeah, because I kind of thought you're installing a product. You're installing the product TCE, but yeah, it's not that simple. And I think it's easier for everybody if it's referred to as Tanzu CLI. It's clearer. It seems to be what folks understand better. Yeah.
Yeah, we should definitely take it into a PR and talk about it. Thanks for doing all that work, Kay. It is really complicated because just to make sure that we're saying the right thing, like you are installing a compiled Tanzu CLI that is compiled for TCE at this juncture. And due to technical debt, that is the state that we're in. So I just want to make sure we're all on the same page there. And I totally hear it. It is remarkably painful.
No, but Kartik was bringing up a bigger issue or a meta issue around that. Like we install a Tanzu CLI. We don't ever install TCE is the idea, right? Like it's the question of can you actually install TCE, or you use the Tanzu CLI to put
installing.
The
yeah, Steve, installing. If you ask me what quote installing TCE means, to me, when I think about that, what installing something means, it's what happens in the deployment process as the north half of each node, as opposed to, the lower half, which is prepping the nodes, right? So you deploy a cluster, which consists of configuring infrastructure and quote installing and configuring TCE, unquote, on those nodes. But since it's hidden in the deployment process, we don't ever need to describe it that way. And if you look at the download page, what the download page points to is it actually says CLI/installer, not TCE for those workloads, for those downloads.
I mean, I think the CLI, we install the CLI and
Right.
then we use the CLI to deploy TCE, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. That was how I would think of it. Is that what you were thinking, Kartik, also, in K?
Yeah, I mean, I understand. So the technical challenges around the CLI and sort of slightly different versions of the CLI across our open source and commercial products. But keeping that aside, I agree with you, Steve, for the larger issue. I think of we're installing like a TCE version of Tanzu CLI, and then you create a cluster. I look at, and this again does go back to the broader issue, which I didn't want to go too much into, which is you're installing capabilities or components which are available in TCE. You're not really installing TCE itself. TCE is an addition. Like, how do you install an addition in my mind? But anyway, that I'll pause here because this can get into bike shedding very quickly. So
yeah, Kartik, one more thing is that we've probably, since TAP and TAP OSS potentially could be installed on any Kubernetes, the installation instructions or the installation process, one or the other, either the automation or the directions should probably say, if you're installing on a TKG or TCE cluster, you install the apps plugin, not the Tanzu command, the Tanzu CLI.
Yeah, I think it'll be good to just close this topic and move on to something else, but just want to raise it up with the TC team. I think this is something to figure out, and it's definitely a gnarly one, so I understand the challenge around it. I think in the longer term, I think it'll simplify the user's journey to knowing what
I think this was a really good convo. Thanks for bringing it up. Like, what I'm taking away to make sure I heard everything correctly is, in our docs, it'd make a lot more sense to frame those initial steps as installing Tanzu CLI. Engineering is kind of pushing back here and saying, okay, but please make sure we all know that all Tanzu CLIs are currently not created equally, unfortunately, due to tech debt. And we can make that like a sub bullet or something in the docs. But I think if we made those changes, then in a future release, again, the goal is to have all of this be unified. This problem will largely go away. Does that seem reasonable, Kartik, as far as like a summary?
Yeah, that sounds accurate. Nancy, you had something?
I'm sorry?
I thought you had another bullet. I was going to turn it over to you.
Oh yeah, there was another bullet. I don't know who put that. I just had to remove it. Just because we're not ready to say anything about that just yet. But you will find out next week. Don't want to be too cryptic, but it's
It'll keep us coming back.
What's that?
It'll keep us coming back.
Exactly. Stay tuned. Any other thing that folks want to talk about regarding the install Tanzu CLI versus TCE? Cool.
Just one question, actually. Sure. That in TKG 151, because I see that we're also trying to base it off of that BOM or building a TC one, the plugins there, at least cluster, and I think one other one became context aware, so they actually aren't installed like during the installer. Is TC moving to that approach as well, where like the cluster plugin gets downloaded after creating a management cluster?
Yeah, great question. The answer is yes, we are moving to that approach. Whether you'll see it in V011 is still to be determined. There's a chance that we will wait until V012 to go fully support the context-aware mode and also be completely OCI based, which is a fancy way of saying that we'll store our plugins in a different location. So more on that soon.
Okay, yeah, because if it does go that way, all I would say is that because in TKG it wasn't done well, I think that should be documented, because it was really weird for anyone that installed TKG that it wasn't documented that you don't have a cluster plugin, and no one could figure out why it wasn't there. So if that can be added to the docs, if that does happen in 0.11, that'll be helpful and remove some pain, I think, of weirdness.
Yeah, we completely agree. And we think the sharp edges are largely one of the reasons why we're trying to wait a bit, because so we're pinning to Tanzu framework version V0.11.2, just by chance, by the way, the version's lined up. And a lot of this has gotten better in newer versions of framework. So that's another reason that it's compelling for us to wait. But totally heard you on the docs, Scott. We shouldn't surprise our users by plugins just disappearing. Thanks.
Another quick question around somewhat related to this thing as well, though, is it wasn't just that the CLIs were different, it was that the config files were also different or something like that, if I remember right, or like they overwrote in the same location or something. Like I can't have both on my machine because I can't have both. Like I can't do a symlink to one and rename the binary and call it something, because they're writing to the same location even. Like you just can't even have either binary. Is that going to be fixed in 11? Like where I could have at least a couple different binaries on my machine, and like I can rename them and they write to the right, like different config locations, so I don't have to have like all that pain of moving directories around and stuff?
Yeah, unfortunately not. We had some work in flight in newer versions of framework that were going to enable this type of behavior, but for a variety of reasons, we're pinned to an older version of framework. And excuses aside, the short answer is no. Unfortunately, it's going to be this painful in V0.11 as well.
Okay, so I will have to like not only, so we're not going to have a unified CLI, and I will still have to like rename directories as I switch between TKG and TCE. Is that correct?
We will not have a unified CLI, and you will have to do that if you want to run multiple versions at the same time.
Okay, not complaining, just wanted to be clear. That's all.
No, it's a super fair question, and we do hear it. We bounce back between different versions as well, even developing TCE, like we'll use the pure framework stuff, then we'll bump to the TCE builds, and it's extremely painful for us too. So needless to say, we were very compelled to make this better. A lot of the changes that will make it possible actually are in framework's main branch and V0.17 release today. It's just a matter of some complexities around us getting TCE on those new versions. So,
but related to that, since we don't have the binaries, does the engineering team actually have some sort of like handy little shell scripts or something that like, because if you guys are switching a lot, maybe somebody has written some sort of cool little utility that they could put in like somewhere that the community could get access to that for those of us who use both, that would make life a little bit easier. I mean, it's not fixing the problem, but it makes life easier. That would be awesome.
Yeah, I would say ask in Slack just so that the whole engineering team can respond. I don't want to speak for everybody, but my intuition is a lot of us use some make tasks that rip and replace everything constantly. And that's probably due to the nature that a lot of our validation is quite ephemeral, which does not represent probably what our end users do, where they want these things to be more long running. So.
Okay.
What I do is, because I work from a jump box, actually, I don't work locally on my machine, so I just have 2 users. Because at least the plugin directory is user-based, and as long as you put Tanzu CLI in, not in USR local bin, but you move it to a different path location, you can make it if you have 2 users on the machine, a TCE user and a TKG user, and have 2 versions.
That's actually a good one. I wonder how I would do that in WSL. I'll have to take a look at how
in WSL, you can just do a user add if you're using Ubuntu, create another user, and then it'll automatically log you in with yours, but you can move over to another
SU
user.
to it or something, or sudo over to it or whatever.
Exactly, just sue into that user. And the only thing that you need to do after installing is move Tanzu CLI from USR local bin to, let's say, like whatever .local bin or whatever in your path that's just for your user.
Right.
And I have a TCE user and a TKG user on my jump box, and a TAP user, because back in the day, TAP couldn't use either of those Tanzu CLIs. So I have 3 users with different Tanzu CLIs. Well, I actually have 4 because I have TKG 1.3, 1.4, 1.5, and TC and TAP, all with different CLIs running. But yeah, that's a whole other story. But yeah, multiple users is, I found the best way to do it today.
Okay, so which brings me to another question, but I don't know if we've run out of time.
I'm all for staying on for a little bit longer to get your question answered.
Okay, so this one's going to come back to Kay and the packaging team, the ones that package up the binary. I think I put in an issue around just document the manual steps to install rather than putting in the packages, like put a binary here, change this, do this, and you've installed it. Like you don't actually have to use any of the package managers, or even the shell script, which puts it in user local bin, right? Because if I had those steps documented, that would be much easier than what Scott said, which is like, okay, install it, but then go to that directory and then come back and move it over here. Like if it was just take this, download, unzip, do this, you're done. Like, I don't know, seems a little, at least having those minimal ones seems much nicer than the whole shell script thing from what I can tell that the shell script does. Sorry. I don't know if that's true or not though.
Yeah,
This may not be a K issue. This might be sorry, go ahead, Kay.
Yeah, I haven't seen the issue, but I'll go take a look.
But it may not be your issue. It might be everybody says, no, we need the shell script. So I don't want to say, yeah, Kay, change this when everybody's like, no, we actually require the shell script. So I shouldn't have tagged you. Sorry. I'll tag Josh because he's Grand Poobah. Josh, do we need the shell scripts?
Yeah, if I'm being extremely honest, when I heard you delegate who the question was for, I stopped paying attention. Would you be able to run it by me again?
Yes, I would, because I do the exact same thing. You are forgiven always for that. At some point I raised the issue of getting rid of the shell, like at least documenting how to just install the binary and like manually setting up on your machine, because I felt like the shell script plus all the packaging plus all that other stuff was doing too much for what was actually really needed in most cases. Or at least we could just document it for people who wanted to do it. Because like Scott's example of, well, okay, if I install it, then you have to actually go to user local bin, take it out of user local bin, put it back into that user's direct. But if I just had instructions like download, put the binary here, add the binary to your path and you're good to go, which is basically what we do. And initial, and then run these 2 commands, right? Like, is there a problem with saying that in the doc? Like, do we need people to use the shell script, or like, what's the, you can delegate that to somebody else too. It's not really
yeah, no, I think there's definitely value in having that purely manual approach. How you do the install of all the plugins has become quite a bit harder and is going to change in the future due to plugins being sourced as basically images going forward, technically like container images. So my short answer would be, yeah, I'm all for it. Is there an issue to track the need? And then let's figure out some of the details of what it would look like, knowing what we know about like how plugin installs are going to change in the near future.
I don't know that they made an issue. I will check, and then if there's not, I will create one and I'll tag you in it. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah.
I'm working right now, by the way, Steve, on a vendor, file that will download the TKG and TC ones and install them into different users, into different paths. That does like the whole installation, takes all the right files, puts them in the right place. Once I have that, I can also share it, and then that'll just be a single command you could run to download TKG and TC CLIs and put them into the right places. So when I have that, I'll share it also, but that is almost working on my end. I'm pretty sure next week it'll be done.
Awesome, Scott. Thank you so much for all your work with the community. It's incredible, and all your useful tips. Like, we really appreciate it. Okay, before we part ways, anything else that folks need to bring up? Okay, thank you everyone for joining today. A really great discussion was had. Thank you everyone who engaged with us today. If you're watching this from home, come join us next week. We meet at 11 a.m. Pacific time for our community meetings. We're going to have a great demo for some of the stuff that Gary's team is working on. So stay tuned for that, and find us on Slack if you have any questions. Thanks.